All right, today's guest is Harris Memisevic. He's an elite coach, educator for the Football Association of Wales, and boys technical director at Virginia Revolution Soccer Club. Harris specializes in building high performance environments that challenge conventional thinking and accelerating growth, developing technically gifted players, empowering coaches, and creating a clear pathways that transform potential into performance. So what makes this conversation a bit different is that his thinking goes well beyond the soccer field. Okay. It's about human behavior, leadership identity, and what it actually takes to help people reach levels they didn't even believe were possible. So, Harris, welcome to the show.
I appreciate it, Nate. I've been listening to the podcast ever since it came out, and it's a pleasure to be on. I think we're gonna have a good discussion.
Heck yeah, man. I'm excited for this. And for those of you that are watching or listening, I've known Harris since 8th grade. This is my best friend. And we pretty much talk, if not, every other day, every day. But definitely a very heartfelt conversation this is. But let me just get into it. So most people think development is about knowledge, right? More information, better techniques, smarter systems. But what if the information was never the problem, though, right? What if the environment you put someone in actually determines everything and almost nobody is building it right? Now, Harris develops elite soccer players and coaches, not just at mediocre levels, but he develops them at the highest of levels. And his philosophy cuts through everything we think we know about performance, leadership, and what actually creates growth. So, Harris, let me ask you this. What does a truly high performance environment actually look like? And why are most organizations getting it completely wrong?
That's a good question to start it off. Um, yeah, I think to create a high performance environment, you have to create a safe space for those that are in your environment to succeed. You have to empower individuals. You have to establish a role for them, and they have to feel that they're comfortable in that role. I think where most organizations get it wrong is they're so process driven, and it's so much about getting to the end goal or completing a task that they forget the middle and the beginning of it. And that's, getting the right people in the room, sharing ideas, allowing that space to share those ideas, making mistakes. Because I think what people tend to forget is or misinterpret when it comes to a high performance environment is that it's polished and that it's always going to be the best and most successful environment always. And the reality of it is it's not. It's going to be challenges. It's going to be a lot of mistakes. It's going to be disagreements. It's going to be tense environments as well. And I think how you manage those environments is what makes a high performance environment, in my opinion.
Let me ask you this. You've gotten to where you're at for a reason. And we're talking about, this conversation is really about high performance environment, how to build that environment. Now, how did you get to where you're at with understanding what it takes to actually have high standards when it comes to coaching and coaching some of the successful teams that you have over the years, as well as playing? Like, what is it that you've learned, or what would you say would you give the most credit to with your teaching and the skill sets that you instill within the kids that you coach, and then even the coaches and the leaders that you teach? Where would you say you learned a lot of that from?
Yeah, I think I was fortunate enough to learn it as a player, and I was fortunate enough to learn it as a coach, a director, and that, eventually a leader in that respect. So I was fortunate enough to get both sides. Now, when you're a player, obviously you're in a high performance environment, and it's important that you have leaders around you, coaches, staff, ownership, sporting directors that have strong leadership skills. And high performance and leadership, I think there's a lot of similarities in terms of being a player or being a coach, you're still trying to succeed. You're trying to get to the end goal. How you do that is going to be different, maybe as a player, and as opposed to how it is as a director, or as a leader. I think some of the things that I learned as a technical director or a coach is I also learned a lot from maybe bad leaders, leaders that maybe I thought to myself, I would scratch my head and be like, I would do it a little bit differently if I was in your shoes. So I learned a lot through maybe leaders that maybe weren't strong in a lot of areas. And it made me think about, when I get the opportunity to lead people, that I would do it a little bit differently. So, to add to that, then skill sets that I think were really important to learn, and I'm still learning is empathy, leading with empathy, involving empathy in the whole process. I think that's a big one for me. I always thought that I had to be right and that people had to understand me, and that people had to agree with me. And I've realized that I'm still realizing that it's not the case. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to be misunderstood. But I think having that relationship with people allows for that space to occur and those things to occur.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I can see where that comes from because you got a lot of experience. Most coaches and leaders, they pour resources into curriculum, content, and training materials. What would you say that they're missing on top of that?
I mean, I've been in environments as a player and more recently now as a coach and a technical director where, you know, the curriculum, the idea of how they want things to operate looks really, really good. And, some of the best that I've seen. But what I've seen with like curriculums and stuff like that, for example, is it just stays on a PDF. It doesn't become alive, and the people make that come off a PDF, and that's through daily behaviors. That's through certain non-negotiables. I'll tell you, Nate, like one of the biggest things, and I'm sure a lot of people will disagree with me on this when they listen to this, is I'm not a big believer in standards. I think that word is misused because your standards might be different than mine. That doesn't mean that you're, less successful than me, or I'm less successful than you just because you might have higher standards, quote unquote. I struggle with that word. I think my approach is, what are your daily rituals and what are your non-negotiables? Because I think those add a little bit more weight and volume in terms of, and those will hold true when tense times occur, when disagreements occur, when the environment is maybe struggling. You have to lean on those daily behaviors and those rituals and non-negotiables. So those are crucial to me. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the word standards.
You say about daily rituals, non-negotiables. What are some of your things that you implement within your daily ritual, and what are some of your non-negotiables? And I'm not just talking about like inside the classroom or out on the playing field, but like in life. What would you say some of those are for you that really help you, every single day function better? And it's like if I don't do these, I know for a fact I'm not gonna perform to my highest of my ability. What would you say some of those are?
Yeah, good question. One of the biggest ones is authenticity. I think people tend to hide behind a perfect product or a perfect personality, and and that's so I think hazardous in a high performance environment if you're not operating in an authentic way. And I always say, everyone has certain things that they can improve on, and if you're not being your authentic self, your weaknesses can also bring value to the environment. So it's always considering that, we're not an end product as individuals, and we might never even become what our end product looks like as leaders, but it's showing that authenticity in everything that we do, and having support and understanding that there's trust around you in terms of, if you struggle in certain things, that there's still value to be brought from your maybe lack of being able to do certain things, it still brings to the environment. I think that the other one is don't bullshit me. You know that for me is like be straight up, be to the point, be um, honest in your approach and everything that you do. I think that's crucial for me because if you don't, I lose all respect for you. If you're not, um, and then I think the last one for me is discipline and detail. And what that means to me is like everything you do on a day to day basis can be measured in some way. And if you're not applying a level of detail and a disciplined approach in the detail that you do everything, I think you're setting yourself up for failure in life. So that's, it can be in my environment, discipline in how we approach, I don't know, creating a curriculum of what I don't know, our U15 should be doing for the next 6 months to a year. And it's not just throwing something out there because we saw it on YouTube or we saw it on LinkedIn. It has to be bespoke to our environment. It has to be bespoke to our kids, and it has to be bespoke to our coaches and our leaders. Are they actually able to implement this? And there has to be a level of detail and discipline behind that detail. And then there's detail in terms of how you operate on a day to day basis. Something as simple as is just how you make your bed in the morning. There's a level of discipline in that detail, and you know those are the biggest ones for me. I think discipline and detail, authenticity, and just don't bullshit me. Those are my non-negotiables. And staff around me and people that know me really, really well know that, and I think that fosters better conversations and better relationships with me personally because they know where I stand in terms of that.
You mentioned authenticity. Why would you say people aren't as authentic as, in today's world? Why?
I think it's a fear of judgment. I think of being maybe perceived in the wrong way. I think there's a huge amount of insecurity going on in the world. Some people just hide it better than others. Um, Again, yeah, it's fear of being judged. I think you know if we were if we were able to see everyone's authentic self in life, I think this world would be a better place. People tend to wear a mask a lot in terms of not just how they operate in their workforce or in their working environment, but also in life. And I think, I always say you'll wake up one day and you'll be 70 and you'll be questioning the decisions you made and the interactions that you had with people and the relationships that you could have had or maybe were disrupted because you weren't your authentic self. And I think it's so important because only then will there be a deep learning around what we're trying to do, deeper relationships with people. People understand where you're at in life, and you have a high level of support around you because people, want to. I'm a firm believer that there's good people out there, a lot of good people that want to see you do well. And I know there's always that saying that be careful of the people around you because they might not always want what's best for you. But I do think there's a lot of people out there that genuinely support who you are and who you want to become. And I think that's important that you're authentic to be able to allow them to support you on where you're going.
Would you say kids are more authentic than adults?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's because right now, and it depends on what age um, kid you're talking about, but we are our inner child and we are our childhood experiences, our childhood traumas. And right now, kids are in a way, they are building that childhood experience and they're building their future adult self. And I think kids obviously don't know any better in terms of whether it's being authentic or not being authentic, and so by nature they're more authentic in what they do. Um, Whether that's not telling the truth on a small incidents or just how they approach life in a naive way. Rightfully so because they're young, but I definitely think they're more authentic. And as you go through life, I think that's where maybe authenticity starts to remove itself because you're trying to you're trying to meet someone else's expectations of you. in whether it's in the workforce, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in a friendship, family, even family as well. You're trying to meet someone else's expectation of yourself, and I'm not saying that's everyone, but I do see it a lot. I do see it a lot.
Yeah, I was curious about that. That kinda leads me to thinking about this as well. Is it easier to teach kids or is it easier to teach the coaches?
That's a really good question. I think it's easier to teach kids. I do. And the reason why I say that is because um, they're still new to life. They're still formulating who they're going to be when they grow up, and they're still um, learning things on a day to day basis, not just on the soccer field, but in life. And that's learning good things and that's learning bad things. I think with adults, I don't want to say just coaches, but adults, I think we tend to be set in our ways, and we tend to operate based off of our childhood experiences and the trauma that we had when we were growing up, the successes that we had growing up, all that stuff. So I think in terms of adults, it's a little bit harder to support growth and support, teaching them. Um, it's one of the biggest reasons why I coach educate, because it's a different challenge for me. It's a totally different approach to develop and teach a coach than it would, or a player than it would be a coach. And it's a little bit more of with coaches and adults, it's a little bit more of a fragile environment where you've got to develop that relationship, which is the same with players, but also show that you care, show that you want them to succeed, and then at some point you have to realize, everyone has a way in life, and they're going to go one way in life, or either they're going to go one way that way or that way, and we can't control that. We can only influence and support them, and yeah, I think it's for me, it's really hard to be able to influence adults, but I think with a little bit of time and care, I think you can get there, and that's for me one of the biggest rewards is when you're influencing coaches and supporting them on their journey.
Yeah, that's a good response. I mean, I think about to what you said. I mean, adults, especially once you get past a certain age, they tend to struggle a bit with like constructive criticism unless they have high humility. If they have high humility, then it's a completely different story because then they want to learn, they want to be able to be taught. And I feel like with kids, for example, kids, because I almost said the word ego. Kids can have ego for sure, but I feel like kids are more willing to be coached than what a lot of these adults are because they'll look at, oh, well, I've been doing this for X amount of years. I've gotten these certificates. I got all these endorsements. People endorse me on LinkedIn. I've been in X, Y, and Z facilities, different clubs. So that makes me better than so and so coming in, even though he might not have as many years over what I do, but he might be more experienced by being in some of these bigger rooms versus what I have. But can I put my ego to the side? A lot of times I feel like adults can't, and those that are really looking to learn. And it's funny because those that think that they are, they might like there's a difference from actually listening to what you're saying and applying it versus just listening and not doing anything with it. And I think when you look at a lot of these big time organizations or any organization, the ones that do it very successful are the ones that are always wanting to learn. They're easily coachable, but most importantly, they go and apply it. They don't wait months to apply it or a year. They apply it the next day, if not the same day. You look at some of these greatest coaches of all time, like Nick Saban, with the Alabama Crimson Tide, Bill Belichick with the New England Patriots. I know we're talking, like football, right? Like American football. But then you can also name who would you say are some of the greatest coaches within soccer?
Yeah, I think one of my mentors, we've developed a really good relationship lately is Michael Beale, and Michael Beale was worked closely with Steven Gerrard, who's a Liverpool legend, and now he's coaching. He's not coaching right now. He doesn't have a team, but he also worked with Jurgen Klopp, who's one of the best. Obviously, you have your Pep Guardiolas, but uh, Jurgen Klopp is up there as well, as a great. And one of the biggest things he said to me, and when I asked him, I said, "How is it working with like a Steven Gerrard or a Jurgen Klopp, who's won the Champions League? They've won Champions League as players, and Jurgen Klopp as a coach." And the first thing he said to me is, "They go to sleep every day afraid that they don't know enough." And I was, I sat there and I thought to myself, like, am I actually doing enough? Do I have the right approach? I'd like to think I do, but it just put in perspective. These are people that maybe could could hang it up and say, I'm done, and they've accomplished everything, but they still go to bed every day thinking that they don't know enough. And then off the back end of what you were talking about, like experiences and all that stuff, Lee, I've kind of adopted like an approach when we go through like the hiring process. One of the biggest things is like obviously the CV has all the experience. I look at that, it's great and all, but it's the connection with the person in that interview process, speaking to them and understanding. Very rarely with me in an interview process will I speak about the role. I'll speak about who you are as a person. What are your values? What was your childhood like? Do you have kids? Do you have a family? What's your relationship like with your family? And what led you to get to where you are today? And what I've realized is a lot of organizations, and you might ask this question or later on, is do you value the experience of the CV, or do you value the experiences that a person went through? And for me, it's the experiences that a person went through. There could be a coach that just started coaching and doesn't have the licenses, so quote unquote, he's not good enough. But the experiences
Right.
that he's gone through in terms of, the childhood, his upbringing, um, you know, w- would I take someone that maybe has their A license that's, quote unquote, a good coach because he's went through the education system of the coaching courses? Or will I get someone that maybe has their D license, still working and is hungry to get to that A license, grew up maybe um, not the easiest of lives, had to work for everything that they have today and are still working towards it, because those are the behaviors that are going to make the environment a high performance environment. You tend to see those people that have, and I'm not saying everyone, but those people that have the higher level licensing or the experiences of accomplishments, that maybe they tend to take a back seat. It's out there. I'm not saying that's everyone, but you do see that a lot. And I think with the right experiences and journey to this day for some people, I think it's just gonna propel their and expedite their journey to success even faster.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Um, Before I pivot here, I just off the cusp that comes to mind, like you're 30 years old and you could have had a family to yourself already. You probably could have kids by now. You probably could have been married, but you're not. And from hearing you talk, like you're so obsessed, I feel like, with what you do. So break that down for me a little bit. Like you're 30 years old and you're at where you're at in life right now. Would you say you're content? Are you striving for more? Why do you keep going at this point when most people stop and let's say take it easy or they decided to settle down?
First off, thanks for reminding me that I'm 30 years old. Although I feel it every single day, every single morning I wake up more and more. So I appreciate that, Nate. Um, what was I gonna say? Yeah, I think in order to be successful in any industry, in any walk of life, you can't be content. And it's cliche. You hear it on these Instagram reels every single day of what it takes to be successful and how you can never be content. And, obviously that Tom Brady interview where he talks about all that stuff. It's out there, and it's almost become like nullified in our ears, and no one wants to hear it anymore because it's so out there, but it's so true. It's so important that you can't take your foot off the gas pedal. I think for me is every single day I get 24 hours a day to be able to execute on the things that I need to execute on, and to essentially, achieve my goals. Will I ever achieve my goals? Probably not, because there's always that next goal. The ladder gets longer and longer and longer. Um, but I think in terms of where I'm at 30 years old, I always have this fear in terms of, what happens when I'm 10 years from now or 20 years from now or 30 years from now. I'm right where I'm at right now, and for me that would be heartbreaking because it just means that I didn't tap into all of the potential that I have. You know, I think there was this like quote or saying before. It's like, what happens if on right before you're about to die, um, or when you die, it's like, God slips you a piece of paper and says, this is what you could have been if you tapped into your potential. And, that rings in my ear all the time. It's like, you don't want to get to the end of life. And it's like, you could have done a lot more. So I think that's always been the mindset. It's always been what's next? How can I develop what I'm currently doing and how can I advance it even further?
Yeah, because why live with regret 10 years from now thinking, "Man, I coulda started sooner," and, now I waited or I procrastinated, it wasn't the right time. If you wanna take this from a business note, like, who cares if you get told no? Who cares if you get denied, hundreds of times? I mean, my gosh, look at, J.K. Rowling with the Harry Potter series, Walt Disney. Look at all these, athletes, like, I'm sure Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi, you name it, I'm sure all the top ones in their field could tell you the same thing, like, they probably got cut X amount of times, they got told no, they got denied, but they kept going. Um, so I think there's something to look at that, there's a trait of they have a massive desire to win, and if you have a massive desire to win, then your potential is always gonna have like a very high you're always gonna have a high potential. You're not gonna have like the utmost smallest potential if you can't take no for an answer. If you can't take no for an answer, you should probably be in sales. But let me ask you this. So most leaders choose comfort over clarity. They soften the message, avoid the conversation, and they let the standards slip because it feels cruel not to. What's the actual cost of that over time, would you say?
Behavior that's hard to undo then after. And
Okay.
it results in even more difficult conversations later on down the road that could have been prevented had you essentially nipped it in the bud early on. I think people, and one of the biggest things I like to study, I'm a bit of a nerd about this, is just human behavior, how you handle difficult conversations. I think handling difficult conversations is an art. It's like one of the, you know, I'm still trying to develop it. And I think people and some leaders maybe soften the message because they don't know what's coming on the other side and how someone's going to take it. Um, but I think, you know, you obviously have your boundaries, you have your expectations of just not yourself, but the organization. And I think, those difficult conversations are really easy to have when you have a relationship with someone. We had Alessandro Nesta, who played for AC Milan, won the World Cup with Italy, legend, one of the best in the game, in the position that he played. He spoke to us at the Aspire event in Philadelphia in October, and this past October, and he said, you know, when you build relationships with people, those difficult conversations have a softer landing. Whereas if you don't have a relationship with someone, that just makes it seem like you're coming off like a dickhead, excuse my language. Um, and it's so important that you have that relationship with people, but then it's also important that you nip things in the butt early on. These are the expectations. I know you're better than that, and but leading with empathy. I know you're better than that. I know I want you to get to where you're trying to go as a person and as a worker in this field, in this career, and these are the behaviors that you need to get to that next level. And I would hate for you to not meet those because it's going to only hurt you in the future when you don't have someone that maybe cares as much from a leadership perspective as I do. Um, so that clarity is so important. It's really, really important because if you if you go down the path of comfort, it's just gonna stack problems. It's gonna stack even more problems that you have to work through later on. And most environments that are high performance environments are quick. It's like quick. And you don't have time to deal with those type of problems in a quick environment that's performing at a high level. So if you can have less of those problems on your stack, the better. 'Cause the last thing you want to do is get preoccupied when things need to get done with things that you should have dealt with in the beginning.
Yeah, if not, then you're probably in for a rude awakening if you ain't ready for that, you know? Man.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the coaches a little bit. What would you say what's the most dangerous type of coach, right? Like, the one who does the most damage to the players without even realizing that they're doing it. Because 'Cause you've worked with a lot of coaches, I know that, so I know for a fact you've seen it all. So what's that like, just that danger zone, you're like, "Oh, yeah."
I think I was, if I'm honest, Nate, I think I almost became one of those, what I'm about to say, but I think it's the one that hasn't killed the player in them before they started coaching. We have a lot of coaches that have played and they've said, well, this is what I did when I played. And this worked for me because I played at XX and X level. And the reality of it is the game's changed since that person might have played. The world has changed. People are different than what they were 5, 10 years ago. Okay. And that's through distraction, social media, all those sort of stimulants that are now in the air. And those are the coaches, the ones that haven't killed the player in them that still have this necessity. And you can see it in the behavior of the way they coach. They're overreactive on certain things that maybe they thought as a player they were able to do, and their kid isn't able to do it, and it's like it just creates a toxic environment and a toxic relationship with the player. So it's that coach that hasn't killed a player in them, and it's that coach that maybe has not fulfilled what they've wanted to fulfill as a player, and now they're forcing it upon another player that maybe doesn't even have the same aims and objectives, goals, ambitions that coach has. Um, you have a coach that maybe had that injury and didn't make it as a pro player, and you know, they were so close and now they've resorted to coaching, which is great, good and all. And they always have that in the back of their head, like, oh, I was this close. So as a result, I'm going to develop this player in the way I think they should be developed to make it to the next level so that I can feel that joy or fulfillment that I've developed that player to make it to the level that I wasn't able to make it. I think it's definitely that coach that maybe hasn't killed the player in them. We at in an ideal world, I love to try and hire coaches that have a teaching background, that are maybe the part-time coaches that maybe, their full-time job is a teacher in a school, because they go from a different approach. So teachers are really good people. And then also I think coaches, and this might be a little bit bold to say, but coaches that have kids, that have a family, because they know firsthand what it's like to work with kids. They know that they always have it, whether they say it or not, they always have it in the back of their head that they wouldn't maybe on any decision that maybe is questionable, they sit there and say, well, would I want this to happen to my own kid? So they always
Mhm.
have that guardrail. So yeah, those are probably the ones that succeed in these environments. And then you have your ones like me that doesn't have kids and but has that, you know, desire to improve and desire to grow.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation because, like you said, I mean, you don't have kids. You got coaches that do have kids, but I feel like more times than not, you see a lot of these former athletes that are now coaches. I feel like they don't do as good versus the coaches that weren't even athletes before. So it's just something that I've always kind of pondered that myself is like, why the heck to these coaches that didn't really, or let's say they played, but they weren't really anything big time. I feel like a lot of these big time players are those that made a name for themselves. Whenever they go to coach, man, they're like the worst coach ever. But would you say that is because they haven't killed the player yet, mainly? Or like, is there anything else that comes to mind on why a lot of these former athletes that are now coaches aren't as successful? Or maybe I'm completely left field and you know a lot that I just haven't seen.
I think coaches that are former players that are content with the way their career ended maybe aren't as big as a danger to the kids as we might be led to believe. I think maybe the challenge is because just because you're a good player doesn't mean you're a good coach. It's a totally different environment, totally different scope of work. Um, Although you have a ball at your feet, or it doesn't make a difference, it, it's so important to understand that I think the accomplished athletes that go into coaching is they see the game from the lens of the level that they played at. And the reality of it is unless you're a pro player and then going straight into a pro environment where maybe they can match that level that you played at, that that's it's going to be hard because to kind of lower your expectations of the kids or the players that you have in front of them. I'll go back to Alessandro Nesta when he spoke to us at the event. You know, his first job as a coach was at Miami FC, which is, it's not the Inter Miami of, of the MLS, so it's a significantly lower level. And right away, he was so frustrated his first 2 or 3 weeks of training the group because he kept on looking at the players as and comparing them to like a Kaká, a Clarence Seedorf, all these players that he played with and won the Champions League with and won the World Cup with at Italy. He compared, and he always asked himself, well, why can't you do what they did? And it made it again a really hard environment to work in for the players because at the end of the day, those players were not at the level that AC Milan players were. So it was really important for him to understand that he needs to lower his expectations. He needs to potentially do a lot more work to get them to hopefully one stage playing at that level. But then understanding that they may never get to that level, that this might be their highest that they can achieve, and he has to adapt. And I think it's adaptability is one of the biggest things that our coaches need to understand, and the upcoming coach needs to understand.
Yeah, yeah, I can agree with that. Let's talk about the players quick. Okay, so you've worked with a lot of kids, you've worked with a lot of youth players, and you work with them. Um, what would you say parents consistently get wrong, and what should they actually be doing to support their child's development?
Is there only one thing I can say?
You can say a couple to few.
I'm just kidding. No, I think the biggest thing is they look to the left and they look to the right and they compare their kid with the kid that's next to them. And
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest dangers is to, they see certain success, you know, being brought out in a kid that plays on their son's team or daughter's team, and they think that, well, why isn't my kid doing that? And their kid is a totally different profile of player, not just a profile of player, but a totally different human being that operates at a different, different way. And that's the art of coaching, is being able to impact all those players. But I think parents need to understand that their kid is not the same as their teammates, and that their journey is going to be different. You know, my journey as a player was different than someone else's journey as a player. It doesn't mean I was less successful and that other player was more successful or vice versa. But it's important that comparison is the thief of all joy. And when you compare, you start to act in ways that maybe are a little bit rash. It's a little bit um, not the right thing to do. Whether it could be, you know, looking at someone else's accomplishments and saying, okay, well, my or daughter needs to do this many hours of private training, spend this much amount of money during the off season and in season to do private training to get to the success of that player. And when in reality, it's every kid's, let's say, football brain marinates differently, and you know, little Johnny's brain is still probably marinating, and it's taking time to develop. And you know, I would not look at. And another thing is parents look at quick wins, and they use the quick wins as a justification that their kid is developing at the highest level, or that they're going to make it to the next level or play at a professional level. When the journey is at least 10 years long. You know, if you're looking United to United scene, it's at least 10 years long, if not more. It's probably 15 or more, even more than 15. So it's understanding that although you get quick wins in year one, that doesn't mean those quick wins are going to translate in year 15. So it's understanding that the journey is bumpy. It's has ups and downs, and it's staying. But I don't fault parents too much, because it's important for us as leaders to educate the parents. One of the biggest things I want to do this upcoming season is spend a lot more time with the parents, educating, putting presentations together, meeting with the U11 parents and saying, hey, this is where your kid is at right now in certain areas of their journey. Might not all be the same, but certain areas of the journey. This is what you can expect. These are the certain challenges you're going to start to that are going to present themselves to your player. And I think with a little bit more education, parents want to know more, know as much as they can about their kid, because their kid is their most important thing in their life. So the more information and time we invest in them, I think the better and maybe the less challenges we'll see off the back end with parents.
Yeah, I agree. I think if I mean, the time is invested into the kids, the parents can then see that, and then I don't know, I feel like parents, they'll either be the kid's worst enemy because they try to coach, or they'll either be their greatest supporter. I don't know, would you say there's an in between at all, or would you say it's one or the other?
It's hard to find the in between. Um, yeah, it's a little bit challenging to be the in between. Um, but I think you see it. I mean, kids are around their parents more than they are their coaches. So you see the parents in the kid, and you see, although you might not always see that parent that's wanting it more than their kid, and that sees their kid maybe in rose-colored glasses. Um, you might not always see that on the sidelines, but you'll see that through the kid's behaviors. You'll see a kid that a parent's always telling them that they're the best on the team, that they're further ahead than what maybe the level that they're at currently. And then you see that through the behaviors of the kid, because the kid maybe doesn't want to work as hard because mom and dad told him at home that he or she is already at that level. So you see that. So it's, although you might not see it on the sidelines, you see it through the behavior of the kids. So I think, to answer your question, I don't know if there's an in between. I think there's a left and there's a right, and you have the parents. And I think at a certain age, when kids start to formulate opinions on their own and are starting to grow their own personality, you can see that, you know, they drift away from their parents maybe a little bit sooner than someone else would, because it's it's the supporter in the parent is not being shown as much, and you know the kids start to kind of veer away from that. And I think, and that's, yeah, I think there's not an in between. I'd hope there is, because I think there's a little bit of goodness and control and chaos, but I think it's a little bit challenge. I haven't seen it yet, so.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One thing my wife T told me, obviously I have a stepdaughter, you've met her. By the way, Harris, he's the godfather to my 1-year-old son, Parker, for those watching and listening, it's a little fun fact for you. T always said to me, she's like, because I'd always say, like, man, like, why do these kids like act out more so with us? And she's like, they'll do these tantrums, they might talk back, they might, lash out or throw a fit, like, I don't want to do it, whatever it might be. And they do that because they're more comfortable with the parent. You get their full 100%. Now, when they go to school or where they're hanging around their friends or their teammates, right? If we're talking the soccer setting, they might not be their full 100%. So you might not necessarily get a chance to see who they truly and fully are, versus being a parent. A parent, you see all sides of your child. So sometimes maybe that is why a parent might be psychologically the way they are with their son or their daughter. And as a coach, you see a side to them that maybe, and even as an instructor, that the parent might not see. So it's very interesting to see all these different um, sides of the player or in everyday life as the child, depending on your role within their life. So I think it's absolutely fascinating. Um, I got a couple more things here, and I'll get you out of here. What is body language? Because I know you're big into, human behavior, body language, and communication. So what would you say what does body language tell you about a player or coach that their words never will tell you?
Well, in case you didn't know, we communicate things 70% through our body language and only 30% about through what comes out of our mouths. So body language is huge. It's something that I geek and I'm a nerd about. I love to learn about that, not just body language, but human behavior. Why do we operate the way that we operate as human beings and the differences between each and every one of us? But I think you, whenever I look at maybe a certain things that in body language of a player, maybe that are maybe negative and maybe lack of confidence, I always revert back to changing my approach. You know, maybe a player is lacking confidence. You see their shoulders aren't upright. Their facial expressions, their ability to focus when you're speaking is not there. Right away you have to change your approach to them. You have to meet them to where they're at. There's something that's missing that you need to give them because they're not at the stage in their brains to be able to give it to themselves. So whether that's instilling a little bit of confidence in them, a little bit of reassurance, um, it might even be a kick in the back end. There's certain ways to bring that out of them. Yeah, I think in terms of coaches, and, you know, it's it's similar. I think one of the biggest things, and I still struggle with that as a leader, is um, whenever you're being educated on a coaching course or being um, evaluated as a staff member at our club, um, it's always intimidating when maybe I come out or another leader comes out because you're wondering on the other, what is he thinking on the other side. And one of the biggest things I'll do when I maybe educate or evaluate a coach is I'll ask them, how do you want to be evaluated? Do you want to be evaluated like me being right beside you? Do you want me being off to the side? Or do you want me to be totally out of the way where I can hear you and I can see enough of what I need to see? And be able to, give you a proper evaluation. I think when you ask that question, it opens the door for then the coach to create their own little bespoke evaluation that caters towards what's going to get the best out of them. So that's a big one. And then it's also right away. Um, Again, we spoke about, uh, being comfortable versus clarity in interactions with people. It's being able to speak to these coaches and say, as soon as you see maybe they're lacking confidence or maybe they're not fulfilling what their potential is, you have to bring them in right away and say, look, I don't care, you know, I don't care if you get it wrong. I don't there is no right or wrong answer in the way you're doing what you're doing. But if you're not authentic, and it goes back to my non-negotiable, if you're not authentic, I can't give you this proper support that you need, right?
Mm,
Because if you're not authentic, I'm giving you an evaluation or guidance and support based off of someone that you're not on a day-to-day basis, that you've just become for the next hour and a half that I'm evaluating it. And we can't cement learning at all if I'm not meeting you where you're at in your journey. So I think when it comes to body language is understanding, how can we get the most out of them, whether it's how we communicate to them, how we check and challenge them, but again, also building that relationship with them. But as soon as I see, poor body language, I always put it on myself to see how can I make them feel more comfortable, whether it's through warm cues of some sort to be able to, essentially get the authentic self out of them.
that's very smart, and I think, I mean, I you're taking, like, the extra mile to do that because a lot of individuals wouldn't even care to do that. It's like, "Nope, I'm gonna evaluate you up close and personal," but the fact that you give them, like, not just 1, 2, but, like, 3 options. I mean, somebody that might not necessarily want someone breathing, you know, right down their neck or something versus versus going all the way back a distance to evaluate them. I mean, shoot, I feel like I'm ready to get evaluated from a distance, just with that. So I think that's very smart. And those that are listening and watching, I hope you're picking up a lot of these skill sets that Harris implements, not just with coaching and teaching kids, but as well as adults, the coaches, and everything. It's something that you can take and apply within your every single day life. I think it's very important. Um, Harris, so I'm going to do, I call it a fast comparison game. I do this with every single guest that's on the show. I'll ask you a handful of, you know, question, just one versus the other. Just say one word that you would prefer. If you need to give an explanation, try to keep it 1 to 2 sentences. But I'll start it off the top and then we'll go to the bottom. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So, environment or information?
Environment.
Accountability or empathy?
Whew. I can't say both, right?
I can't say both.
I think empathy brings out accountability, so I'll say empathy.
Okay. Standards or flexibility?
I just said I didn't like that word. And now you're making me use it, so standards.
Yeah, I made these pretty strategic. Player or coach?
I get in trouble if I say one or the other.
If you
Guys,
have to say both, I'll give you a get out of jail free card.
just for disclosure, guys, I was backed up in a corner, but I'll say players.
Okay. Talent or character?
Character, 100%.
Wales or Virginia?
Virginia.
Discipline or freedom?
Man, these get harder and harder. Um, Discipline or freedom?
Yeah, yeah, they're gonna get even harder.
I think it's discipline. Because when you're disciplined, you're allowed to have freedom naturally, I think.
Trust or fear?
Trust, 100%.
Good person or good leader?
You can't be a good leader without being a good person, so a good person.
Words or actions?
Actions, 100%. Don't sell me a bag of shit.
Yeah, straight up. Potential or performance?
Performance, I mean, a lot of people out there have high potential, but if they don't perform, then that potential is put in the back seat.
Comfortable or challenged?
challenged always. You have to be challenged. You can't be comfortable. There's a comfort in being in seeing the success as a result of being challenged. There's a comfort, but there's no comfort versus challenged.
Yeah. Interesting responses. Last question for you, Harris, and then I'll get you out of here. You're shaping players, coaches, and organizations across not just one continent, but two continents, right? If there's one belief, one thing you know to be true about human development that most people are still sleeping on, what would you say that is?
Oh, good question. I think, is it me developing that human or us developing ourselves as human beings?
Let's say us developing as humans.
Us developing ourselves as human beings?
Yeah,
I
let's
think
say
it's
that.
under I think it's understanding what our why is in everything that we do. I think it's then establishing a plan, doesn't have to be a perfect plan, and then attacking that a million miles an hour. I think that's the key to success. It's the key to, you know, where we're trying to go. And along that journey, seeking advice, having humility, being modest of your approach, leaving your ego at the door, but attacking what you want and your why at a million miles an hour. And that's going to be uncomfortable at times, and there's going to be a lot of sacrifices. I think when you get to when you get through that race, or not that race, but that attack, as you go through it, you start to develop as a person. You start to develop what your morals and values are as a person, because you've understood what your why is, and you understand where you're trying to go as an individual. And that's going to then shape your morals, your values, what you believe is the right way of doing things. Um, but when not having your why and not having a clear idea of where you're trying to go and take your life, um, I think that's, a recipe for disaster. So I'd say that's the biggest thing for me, is understand your why and then go after it.
100%. Yeah, your why is absolutely everything. Uh, Harris, I do this with every guest. I always like to give them my flowers at the end. So you've obviously busted your rear end off for many, many years. I've seen it since 8th grade, obviously being, my best friend and everything, and getting to where you have gotten to so far in your life at, unfortunately, I know you're pretty old, 30 years old. It's been awesome seeing your journey so far and just seeing the amount of hard work that you put in, to your craft day in and day out, not just with coaching kids, but also teaching, coaches and going country to country, state to state, continent to continent, instructing people and speaking at, a lot of these different expos and conferences. So what you've been able to do at 30 years old is definitely very inspiring. And I know you know that. There are people that are 40, 50, even 60 years old that kind of dream to be in the position that you're at in uh in today, I guess you can say. So um yeah, man, it's so cool because you were somebody that was always doubted early on, but I always say things typically come full circle in the journey of life. And I feel that's definitely happened within yourself. And I feel intuitively that you were in store for so much more great things ahead. And I'm excited to be a part of that journey. And yeah, I just wanted to pay my respects, man. I love you, brother.
I love you too, man. Thank you so much. It means a lot. Those are such kind words. I wish you would say it to me on a daily basis and not having me tear up over here. But no, I really appreciate it. And the journey's not done. We keep going. We keep striving for more. And I'll share as well. This podcast is growing every single day, and you're having some really good guests on this podcast. And I'm an avid listener, and I think if we can continue getting people on this on the train as well and listening to this, 'cause I think there's a lot of good stuff that you're providing your audience. And I think if you decide to ever have me again, I think we'll when we do it again, we'll have a bigger audience, and a bigger impact than you already have. So it's huge right now. It's just gonna keep getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah. No, thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
man. I appreciate that. Yeah, I could go way deeper, man. I'd be crying though, just straight up. So, um, where real quick for the viewers, listeners, where can they find you if they wanna follow you, like, on social media, anything like that?
Yeah, I think I have all the social media handles. LinkedIn, you can find me just Harris Memisevic. Instagram, you can find me. I don't know what my Instagram name is, just Harris Memisevic as well. Facebook, I don't usually really use that much. Twitter, I really don't use that much. I have it. And yeah, I mean, club's Instagram page, Virginia Revolution. There's a lot of good stuff that gets posted and what we're trying to do. And it's not just me always; it's the work that's being done, maybe under my leadership, but from good coaches and good people in the building and good leaders. So, um, yeah, those are some areas you can find me in. You don't need to look too far.
Don't need to go down the rabbit hole is what they say, but I'll attach everything in the description below for those that wanna check Harris out, see what he's up to, but again, appreciate you being on the show, brother.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.